Welcome to today's deep dive. We are taking on a subject today that touches millions of people, yet somehow it still remains completely misunderstood by, well, almost everyone.
Yeah, it really is universally misunderstood.
Right. And our source material today is this profoundly moving, just incredibly raw personal essay. It's titled La enfermedad que no solo borra la memoria.
Which translates to the disease that not only erases memory.
Exactly. And the mission for our deep dive today is to move entirely past all the clinical definitions. We want to get away from the sterile medical statistics of Alzheimer's disease and really explore the agonizing real-world experience of it.
Because the numbers just don't tell the whole story, do they?
Not at all. We are looking at this not just from the perspective of the person suffering, but through the eyes of the entire orbit of family around them.
Yeah, and to really grasp the weight of this essay, we have to recognize the common misconception that almost all of us share. Like, when we picture memory loss or Alzheimer's specifically, we tend to use very gentle imagery.
Oh, totally. Like a movie fading to black.
Right, exactly. We think of it like an old photograph left out in the sun. The edges curl up, the colors soften, and the image just kind of fades away into white. It sounds peaceful.
Like a quiet retreat.
Yeah, a quiet retreat into old age where a person simply forgets and maybe, even forgets their own pain.
Okay, let's unpack this right away because the author wrote this essay specifically to shatter that exact illusion of a placid ending. Alzheimer's is not a fading photograph.
No, it's not.
It is a house fire. It's this chaotic, destructive force that dismantles everything it touches, leaving the structural beams of a whole family totally charred.
That's a brutal way to put it, but so accurate.
The reality presented here is that the person suffering doesn't peacefully slip away. They live in a state of constant, recurring distress. They're completely unmoored from their present and their past.
And, whether you are currently dealing with aging parents, or maybe you're starting to notice some terrifying early signs, or you're just thinking about your own cognitive future, this deep dive is designed to completely reframe how you view memory, identity, and preparation.
Right, because assuming this is just a distant disease of the grandparents is one of the most dangerous psychological traps we can fall into.
Absolutely. And the essay confronts that stereotype head on by detailing how this disease actually begins. I mean, when we visualize an Alzheimer's patient, the default image is usually someone highly fragile, right?
Yeah, like someone in their late 80s or 90s.
Exactly. But the author's mother broke every single one of those expectations. She was under 70 years old. She was a robust, fiercely independent woman.
Oh, and she was a polyglot, right? She
Yeah.
spoke multiple languages fluently.
Yes, multiple languages and a voracious reader. So by all conventional surface-level assumptions, she was a completely atypical victim.
Well, I do want to push back on that a bit, or at least wrestle with a contradiction I noticed in the text.
Okay, go for it.
The author goes into detail about modern lifestyles, specifically how excessive sugar consumption silently weakens our brains over decades. She also argues that modern technologies are reducing our daily cognitive effort, which degrades our biological ability to compensate for natural aging.
Right, the whole use it or lose it concept.
Yeah, exactly. But if the mother was a polyglot and a voracious reader, she clearly wasn't relying on a smartphone to do her thinking for her.
That's a really good point.
So is the author saying this modern cognitive decline caused her mother's illness, or is this just a broader societal warning?
The author is definitely making a broader societal warning rather than giving a strict one-to-one clinical diagnosis of her mother's habits. What's fascinating here is the concept of a cognitive reserve.
Cognitive reserve?
Yeah, so the mother had a massive cognitive reserve because of her reading and language skills, which actually might have masked the disease's early physical progression.
Oh, wow. So she was compensating without realizing it.
Exactly. But while acknowledging her mother's high intellect, the author also notes her mother did have a history of poor diet and sleep habits. So the core message the author is broadcasting to you and me is about the silent, insidious timeline of the disease.
Meaning it starts way earlier than the symptoms show up.
Right. If a neurological collapse can take down a robust multilingual woman under 70, what is a modern lifestyle of highly processed diets and low cognitive effort setting the rest of us up for? The disease's presence begins far earlier than we are willing to accept.
That silent onset is terrifying, especially when you look at the subtle signs the mother displayed early on. The author shares these haunting details that, at the time, made absolutely no sense to the family.
Yeah, those details really stuck with me.
Like, for instance, this incredibly confident woman started coming home at unusual hours, walking with her head down, looking completely defeated. And then she inexplicably sold off her prized, carefully curated collection of books for mere pennies.
And to a family, those actions don't immediately scream terminal neurological decay. They look like eccentricities,
Right, exactly.
They look like depression, or perhaps just a stubborn phase of life.
The most glaring example of that in the essay is when the mother got ruthlessly scammed in a business deal. A male coworker, someone she actually spent a lot of time with, recognized her vulnerability long before her own family saw it.
Which is just heartbreaking.
It really is. He entangled her in a transaction where she lost significantly, and the family's reaction wasn't to take her to a neurologist. They thought she was just being an obstinate, independent woman making her own choices.
Because why wouldn't they? That was her personality.
Right. It makes me think of a computer with a failing hard drive. From the outside, the monitor looks fine, the keyboard looks fine. When the computer starts glitching, you think the user is just making bad choices, clicking the wrong links, or being careless.
Yeah, that's a great analogy.
You don't realize the internal operating system, like the actual physical machinery, is breaking down.
And the tragedy of that failing hard drive is that the breakdown happens in the brain's executive function first. The prefrontal cortex, which handles judgment, risk assessment, and complex decision-making, begins to decay.
So the logic center goes offline early.
Yes, so a person who can read 3 languages perfectly well can still sign a disastrous contract because they can process the vocabulary but have completely lost the capacity to evaluate the consequences.
Wow.
And because these early signs mimic personality flaws, families fall right into a devastating psychological trap.
The trap of outright denial. When the diagnosis finally came, the author openly admits their first reaction was to say, well, everyone forgets things.
It's such a natural defense mechanism.
It is. Processing that your mother's mind is dying is too monumental a blow. But that denial forces families to misinterpret medical symptoms as intentional acts of will.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, in the early stages, the person still looks and sounds completely like themselves. So when they ask the same question 4 times in 10 minutes or misplace an important document, the family gets frustrated. They argue. They demand the person try harder, or they accuse them of not paying attention.
The denial tricks the family into treating neurodegeneration as a behavioral choice.
Exactly. And you can only try to logic with an illogical mind for so long before you completely burn out.
And the psychological toll this takes on the family is immense, because eventually the deterioration speeds up, the denial shatters, and what fills that sudden void is a crushing, suffocating guilt.
Yeah, the guilt is overwhelming.
The family realizes they wasted their loved one's final lucid months fighting over absolute absurdities. They miss the closing window to have the conversations that actually matter,
The chance to resolve old tensions, to ask about family history.
or just to share a peaceful afternoon. All of it is gone. Those unresolved issues are now locked in a vault that can never be opened again.
And as the disease progresses past those early stages, the focus of the essay shifts drastically to the family nucleus itself. The caregiver essentially disappears into the void of the illness.
They really do.
Suddenly, round-the-clock caregiving falls onto the shoulders of untrained family members, usually adult children or partners, who are simultaneously drowning in their own anticipatory grief.
The text highlights just how unequipped these family members are for what is required, because we aren't just talking about making sure someone eats lunch.
No, not at all.
We're talking about managing highly erratic, dangerous behaviors. The mother would wander out of the house unexpectedly. There were intense, unexplained bouts of anxiety and abrupt, aggressive emotional outbursts. The family is basically trapped in a house with a profound unpredictability.
The author makes a chilling observation about trying to manage that unpredictability. You are sitting across from someone who has the exact same face, the exact same voice, and the exact same eyes that have comforted you your entire life. But the machinery behind those eyes is processing reality in a completely alien way. You instinctively try to reason with them, to calm them down with logic, but the capacity for reason has been physically eroded.
It creates a constant draining friction. The caregiver is totally absorbed by the disease's downward trajectory. And the cruelest part is that Alzheimer's doesn't give you a roadmap.
Right, there's no timeline.
None. It never stops advancing, but it doesn't tell you when it will suddenly accelerate or when it will just plateau for a year. The uncertainty just swallows the caregiver whole.
And once the caregiver's mental and physical state starts cracking under that pressure, the broader realities of the disease come crashing through the roof. We see a total systemic collapse.
The essay frames this collapse using a brilliant, albeit tragic, metaphor. The author describes the brain as the captain of a ship, and the devastating reality of Alzheimer's is that the captain abandons the ship long before it actually sinks.
That imagery is just so powerful.
It really is. I want to spend a moment on the biological mechanism of that because it explains so much of the horror. We associate Alzheimer's with the hippocampus, the part of the brain that forms memories.
Sure, that's what everyone thinks so.
But the decay doesn't stop there. It slowly creeps into other lobes and eventually down toward the brainstem. And the brainstem is the autopilot. It controls swallowing, breathing, heart rate, temperature regulation.
So it's not just memory anymore.
Exactly. So the captain isn't just forgetting where the ship is going. The captain forgets how to keep the engines running. What begins as a neurological issue, forgetting a name, turns into a massive, multidisciplinary medical crisis where the body simply forgets how to function.
And managing a systemic physical collapse of that magnitude introduces an entirely new dimension of suffering, which is the unseen economic impact.
Oh, this part is brutal.
The text specifically highlights the reality in countries like Colombia, where specialized, full-time professional care is an absolute luxury. It is completely out of reach for the vast majority of citizens. And even for families who manage to scrape the funds together, the sheer cost of round-the-clock medical care devours a family's entire accumulated wealth.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The financial ruin becomes a secondary terminal diagnosis for the family itself. You have a shrinking family unit, likely already dealing with modern job insecurity, and now they're being financially bled dry over the course of a decade by a disease that has no cure.
Yeah, it's a compounding trauma.
It compounds the emotional weight to an unbearable degree. You are grieving your mother and simultaneously watching your own financial future and your children's financial future just vanish.
And that intense physical and financial pressure inevitably forces a breaking point. Domestic care eventually becomes entirely unsustainable.
You literally can't do it anymore.
No, you can't. The family physically cannot lift the patient anymore, and they cannot afford private in-home nurses. This forces the agonizing decision to move the patient to a geriatric home.
The essay tackles the massive social stigma attached to this decision. From the outside, extended family and society often judge this harshly. People whisper the word abandonment.
Yeah, they call it inhuman or cruel to send your mother away to an institution.
But the author forcefully argues that until you have lived inside that broken house, you have absolutely no right to judge the people trying to escape it. Institutional care becomes an inevitable necessity because the level of medical intervention required is impossible for an untrained, exhausted family to provide in a living room.
Right, and it is within those institutional walls during the later stages of the disease that we witness the ultimate tragedy. The total unmitigated dilution of identity, the loss of basic human autonomy is staggering.
That section of the essay was deeply difficult to read. The intimate, autonomous self simply ceases to exist. The mother could no longer dress herself. She lost the ability to bathe herself.
The introduction of adult diapers becomes necessary.
Yeah. The author describes her mother's declining mind as a turbid nebula, just floating fragments and confused, untethered associations.
And the specifics of those confused associations are what truly break the heart. The mother retained the memory of the author as a young child. But when she looked at the adult author standing right in front of her, she couldn't connect the two.
She didn't recognize her own daughter.
No, she saw her own father or a brother or just a vaguely familiar stranger. The childhood was preserved in some distant neural pathway, but the adulthood, the entirety of their mature relationship, was permanently erased.
The erasure continues until almost nothing is left. The author writes that towards the very end, the only piece of information the mother retained was the memory of her national ID number.
Just a cold string of digits.
Exactly. Every single other thing, her rich history, her multiple languages, her favorite books, her deep loves, was just gone.
It is the ultimate cruel reduction of a human being, a vibrant life condensed to a bureaucratic code. And when the identity vanishes entirely like that, leaving only the physical shell, the family enters what the author calls the final, most taboo phase of the disease.
The waiting room of death. Because, unlike cancer or heart failure, there is often no clear finish line with Alzheimer's. A doctor doesn't sit you down and say, you have roughly 6 months to get your affairs in order.
There's no timeline to brace for.
None. There is just an indefinite, agonizing waiting room where the body refuses to give out, even though the person you loved has been gone for years.
Which brings us to the author's darkest and most honest admission in the entire essay. It forces us to look at incredibly uncomfortable questions about how we, as a society, handle end-of-life care and prolonged suffering.
The author admits to the desire for it all to just end, to actively wish for the suffering to stop, which ultimately means wishing for the death of your own mother.
This raises an important question, though. Can you imagine the psychological burden of having that thought?
I can't even fathom it.
Desiring the end of your parent's life can feel like a profound, unforgivable betrayal. It feels entirely selfish. You start to question your own morality. But the author points out that this is a deeply human, rational reaction to witnessing prolonged, agonizing suffering that has absolutely zero possibility of reversal. There is no hope for miraculous recovery to cling to. The grief is just trapped in a loop.
And while the family is drowning in the guilt of wishing for an end, they are also gripped by a deeply self-centered terror. You are looking at your mother or father, watching their intellect completely disintegrate, and the unavoidable thought creeps into your head, will this happen to me?
Oh, absolutely.
Every time you misplace your keys or forget a name after that, it isn't just a lapse in memory anymore. It transforms into stark terror. You become terrified of losing your own mind, of becoming a burden to your own children.
And that terror is exactly why the author pivots the essay from a personal, tragic narrative into a desperate plea. It becomes a call to action for the reader.
Right, a warning.
Yes. The central thesis of the conclusion is that ignorance is no longer an acceptable option. We cannot afford to look away just because the subject is frightening.
We have to actively prepare for our own old age and our own potential dependency. But, as the essay points out, there are massive cultural and societal barriers to actually doing this. People fundamentally do not want to talk about their own mental decay.
The author specifically points to cultural and religious resistance as a major roadblock.
And just to be clear, we are simply reporting the author's viewpoint here.
Right, of course. She argues that the deeply ingrained idea of leaving things up to God's will or delegating our end-of-life fate to divine chance actively prevents families from making necessary practical preparations.
It becomes an excuse to avoid the conversation.
Exactly. The author also argues that our judicial and health systems are lagging far behind the reality of the disease. Instead of providing clear, accessible tools for families facing this crisis, these systems often fall back on moral or religious ideals that offer absolutely no practical solution when a family is drowning in medical debt and emotional collapse.
The essay doesn't just leave us with that frustration, though. It offers one incredibly vital, practical piece of advice to push through those societal barriers, which is advance directives.
Living wills.
Yeah, living wills, stating clearly and legally exactly what you want to happen if you lose your cognitive abilities. The author stresses that drafting these documents should not be treated as a morbid taboo.
No, it's essential.
It is, in fact, the only way to shield ourselves and our families from the absolute senselessness of a disease that offers no return ticket. If you don't prepare, forcing your family to live in that extreme state of helplessness can be as devastating as the disease itself.
Creating an advance directive is about taking control of your narrative while you still possess the cognitive capacity to do so. It is an act of profound love.
That's a great way to put it.
You are lifting the burden off your family members, who will inevitably be forced to make impossible, guilt-ridden decisions if you don't legally outline your boundaries for them right now.
So, what does this all mean for us today? If we step back and look at the core of this incredible essay, the lesson is stark. Alzheimer's disease does not merely erase memories.
It erases identities.
It erases family bonds. It erases the future projects and dreams of everyone involved. It is a slow-moving collapse that destroys the entire ecosystem surrounding the patient. And when the disease has finally run its course, it doesn't just leave a quiet absence. It leaves the smoking wreckage of everything that crumbled along the way.
It is an incredibly heavy reality, but a necessary one to confront while we still have the clarity to do so. We want to leave you with a final thought to mull over today, something to take with you long after this deep dive ends.
Yeah, what's the takeaway?
If you knew for a fact that your own cognitive framework might one day betray you, what conversations would you stop putting off today? Who do you need to forgive or seek forgiveness from before the capacity to do so is permanently lost? And on a strictly practical level, have you legally documented your own boundaries for care and quality of life?
Those are the questions that truly matter and the ones we so often run away from. Thank you for joining us on this profound deep dive. We highly encourage you to cherish your minds, safeguard your memories, and most importantly, have those difficult conversations with your loved ones today. Because as we learned from this essay, memory isn't a photograph that gently fades in the sun. If we aren't careful and if we aren't prepared, it's a fire that can consume the whole house. Take care of yourselves, and we will catch you next time.